Our second talk in this panel is by Rose Gardner. Rose is a PhD candidate in the Department of French at Columbia University. She will defend her dissertation, The Scepter and the Cilice, The Politics of Repentance in 16th Century France, in May 2019. Her next book project is tentatively titled From Consolation to Obedience, Policing Emotions in 16th Century France. She has been the recipient of several awards, such as the Mellon Humanities International Travel Fellowship and the Chateaubriand. She holds a master's degree in comparative literature from the Université Paris-Sorbonne, Paris 4, and Hunter College, and was a pensionnaire étrangère at the École Normale in 2016. And her talk today is entitled Theological-Political Arborescences, Louis d'Orléans' La plante humaine.
Okay, so my talk today is called Theological-Political Arborescences, Louis d'Orléans' La plante humaine. Among the many eulogies, oraisons, and discourses published in the aftermath of Henry IV's assassination in 1610, one stands out both because of the identity of its author and the oddness of its content. Dedicated to Marie de Médicis, the king's grieving widow, La plante humaine, sur le trépas du roi Henri le Grand, is an eulogy of a notorious ligueur repenti named Louis d'Orléans, who was once an important member of the ultra-Catholic Holy League, a political party opposed to Protestantism and the Bourbon king. D'Orléans, who had been forced to live in exile for 8 years, was eventually pardoned and welcomed back into the fold of the state. What makes this text particularly striking is not only the fact that it is an encomium written by such an ex-leaguer, but also the single-mindedness with which the plant metaphor is turned into a demonstration of his reconciliation with the king, sustained as it is throughout the length of the text in an impressive 500 pages. It starts rather predictably with a courteous dedication to Marie de Médicis, the queen, in which the monarch, as announced in the title, appears as a plant. Ô Madame, la belle et noble plante qu'était en terre le feu roi, votre mari, l'excellent arbre qu'il était dans les vergers de ce monde, et particulièrement dans l'enclos de ce grand parc de l'Europe. De quelle grâce était cette plante royale, de quelle beauté son tronc, de quelle étendue ses branches, de quelle vertu sa feuille, de quelle humanité sa fleur, de quelle grâce et bonté les fruits qu'il apportait, et dont la terre jouit en récompense de sa perte. While we are far here from the more common political medieval metaphors, be it that of the body politic with the king as the head and the people as the body, a model that Hobbes would of course take up later in his own way in the Leviathan, or of that of the state as a ship with the king at the helm, the plant metaphor in this passage has not yet been pushed beyond what could be expected of an encomium. Since the Middle Ages, trees had been used as metaphors to represent and display royal dignitas. They were associated with royal genealogy and kingship and had been used to highlight the transmission of power and to exalt royalty by recalling origins. But in d'Orléans' text, men at times are portrayed as kin to the plant world, the blood-like sap flowing through similar arborescences. Qu'est-ce que l'homme qu'une plante humaine et raisonnable, une plante qui parle et qui discourt, plante dont la vigueur, l'odeur et la beauté s'élèvent sur toutes les autres plantes de ce monde? Est-ce pas une plante qui a ses feuilles, ses fleurs et ses fruits selon les diverses saisons de sa vie? Plante de qui le tronc sont les pieds, les branches sont les bras, les rameaux sont les doigts, la tête c'est la cime, l'humeur radicale est la sève qui la soutient et l'alimente, et que la nature distribue jusqu'aux plus petites extrêmes parties de tout le corps. N'est-ce pas une plante qui a le pied en terre et le chef au ciel? Adopting a classical topos used during the Renaissance, d'Orléans, like many before him, is privileging both a biblical and Neoplatonic reading of man as a divine plant, une plante céleste. Unlike animals, which are inferior and forced to contemplate the earth because their bodies and heads face the ground, and because they lie on a horizontal axis, man is vertical like a plant. His head, the summit where his soul resides, reaches to the skies. As Plato writes in his Timaeus, God has given man a soul housed on the top of the body. which, I quote, raises us, seeing that we are not an earthly, but a heavenly plant, up from the earth towards our kindred in the heaven. With dorléan, this classical depiction of man, not only as the king of animals, but as the king of plants, will not be the end point of the rhetorical deployment of his eulogy. Little by little, what appears to the reader is that botany becomes a multifaceted way of thinking through a complex political situation, one involving questions of exile, rootlessness, transplantation, and hybridity. What I'd like to do here today is examine some of the ways in which this botanical prism allows dorléan to state in a very unexpected way his allegiance to the absolutist model that historians such as Arlette Joannin and many others have described as being already at work during the reign of Henry IV. One of the relationships that les plantes végétantes et raisonnables have in common, claims d'Orléans, quoting Pliny the Elder, and here he is talking about plants and humans, is the pleasure they take in traveling. Arborum et hominum natura peregrinationis avida. They love to be transplantés de leur sol naturel en autre non moins bon que le premier, afin de jeter plus de feuilles, de fleurs et de fruits, et de s'accroître de racines, de troncs et de branches, et de donner des fruits de toutes parts. To illustrate this idea, which may appear marvelous to some, d'Orléans relates an encounter he had in the Pays Brabant, where, as an ultra-Catholic leaguer, he had been forced into exile following Henry IV's conversion and coronation. Having heard of a distinguished bourgeois living near Brussels who was known as un homme de lettres, de vertu, fort honnête et affable, et digne de la réputation qu'on lui donnait, he had become curious to see the man's renowned garden, rempli de simples that had come from all quarters of the world. In d'Orléans' words, this visit was a replaying of the ones Pliny the Elder had famously paid to Antonius Castor, a great doctor of his time who owned a celebrated botanical garden. It is in the garden of the bourgeois in Brabant that d'Orléans comes across a plant which, even though it is not stated explicitly, is depicted as suffering from its exile, as he himself was suffering from his own. Et lors, il me montra un de ces oliviers étant à un bout de la galerie, lequel me sembla merveilleusement beau. Mais ce qui m'ébahit, c'est qu'il y avait les fleurs noires, dont il était tout couvert, et les autres oliviers portaient blanches comme lys. The Gardner explains the diversity of the olive tree through the narration of its origins. He had obtained a graft of it, fraîchement coupé et dont la doiture était belle et haute, from a noblewoman who had held the branch during a procession she attended in Genoa on Palm Sunday, le jour des rameaux. The next day, when she traveled to the gardener's country, she brought it with her and gave it to him. It is this olive branch, states the gardener, that vous voyez si belle, mais pareille de noir, au lieu que les autres ont les fleurs blanches. Vous connaîtrez par elle combien vaut la transplantation. D'Orléans understands the gardener's words as might a natural philosopher, discussing the grafting and transplanting of trees. He states that the olive tree must have become altered because of its abscission in the long time that had passed before it was replanted. Pour ce que la part où le couteau avait passé, il avait altéré le bois et gâté la moelle et le suc du rameau, comme ils se corrompent aux membres de l'homme quand le glaive les a offensés. Car les plantes, lui dis-je lors, sentent leurs plaies, et en douleur, comme nous, et craignent que leur continuité ne vienne à se dissoudre par la violence du fer. Elles en pleurent et jettent gouttes amères de leurs yeux, certains témoins de leurs sentiments et de la douleur qu'elles souffrent, comme fait la vigne en son incision, ou la myrrhe et l'encens qui pleurent en leurs blessures. C'est le sujet pourquoi le poète Ovide, parlant de Myrrha, changeait en l'arbre de myrrhe, dit ainsi. Elle pleure sans cesse et son écorce, toute moite d'humide pleurs, distille goutte à goutte. Borrowing from Pliny the Elder and Ovid, plants are described here anthropomorphically. They express sentiments, they shed tears, they feel their wounds, they suffer pain and worry about the preservation of their lineage. Should they be cut, they will blacken and become contaminated like the severed members of a human body. Dorléan goes as far as to assert, half jokingly and completely autobiographically, that perhaps the olive tree is dressed in black in mourning because it has been snatched away from its native soil and is saddened by the loss of contact with its kin, acquaintances, and friends. His tone then turns very serious again when he insists that ce ne sont pas fables, mais histoires vraies et naturelles, que les plantes sont quelquefois dolentes, d'être tirées du sol et du sein de leur pays naturel pour les transplanter ailleurs. If exile is painful, and d'Orléans seems to suggest that it was in his case, the inclusion of this passage in a eulogy to the king needs to be interpreted. In fact, what d'Orléans is staging is a kind of reinterpretation of exile through botany. And it is not by chance that the whole scene takes place in a jardin des simples, that is, a medicinal garden. Against d'Orléans' portrayal of mournful exile, the Gardner provides another reading. Il n'y a chose que les plantes aiment davantage que de changer de place et d'être transplantées. Le commun appétit des plantes, et s'il faut dire ainsi, la commune volupté est de pérégriner et d'être transplanté à un autre sol où il se délectait. If d'Orléans ends up being entirely convinced by the Gardner in the text, it is perhaps because it provides a narrative of reconciliation with the king. Just like a plant, d'Orléans in the end seems to suggest that his exile was not as tragic as he perhaps perceived it to be at the time. And just as plants often benefit from their transplantation, he might have become stronger because of it. Exile can also be the sign of a political election by God. D'Orléans adds a biblical argument from l'autorité of the book of Genesis, in which God, pour le faire très grand, enjoined Abraham to leave his family and country in order to travel to a new land with the promise of making him the leader of a great people. The figure of Henry IV again looms large in this passage. Hadn't he also crossed territories, abjuring Protestantism and becoming a Catholic in order to become a king? In fact, this entire section in d'Orléans' text culminates with the monarch's transplantation into the generous ground of the heavens. Je reviens donc à cette transplantation et dis que s'il est vrai, comme il est vrai que la transplantation soit si utile et agréable aux plantes d'ici-bas, qui pourra porter en vie à la félicité où est destiné le feu roi, que lui, qui était une plante humaine, si belle et si agréable entre les hommes, que Dieu, par une transplantation, en est résolu, par sa miséricorde, d'en faire une plante divine. Il est gardé pour le planter en terroir le plus généreux, le plus beau et le plus tempéré qu'on puisse imaginer. In this apotheosis of positive transplantation, the botanical metaphor, which has served to think the question of exile in times of political upheaval, becomes a political theological concept. If plants are being described here, not as they usually are, as inanimate and immobile, but rather as moving and desiring to be transplanted, it is because they announce the beatitude of the ultimate transplantation that takes place in death. Henry IV's final election in his transplantation is his transplantation in heaven. This is very much in keeping with St. Paul's belief that life on earth is life in exile for the Oronopolitas, the citizen of the heavens. One could say that along with transplantation, hybridity is another concept to emerge consistently in d'Orléans' vertiginous text. The grafted olive branch that yields black flowers among trees normally flowering white is clearly an example of this crossing and mixing. But we must also take into account the religious undertones present in the Gardner's explanation of this unusual flowering and how d'Orléans comes to interpret it. The graft of the flower, the Gardner says, was culled specifically for the occasion of the Jour des Rameaux, which represents the day Jesus entered Jerusalem. It was merely a week before his crucifixion and before his resurrection, in which he would make his final transplantation into paradise. D'Orléans begins by explaining this mutation of the flowers as a natural philosopher would. He states that the tree resembles the diversity we see in all of nature. The same parents can have children with blonde hair and with black hair, and others with black. The same apple tree can produce red apples and white ones. Since, he claims, quoting Pliny the Elder, that nowhere in nature can greater variation be found as when it comes to flowers, his amazement can only end there. Je mets fin à mon ébahissement. What are we to make of this lesson in natural history when it is presented within an explicitly religious context, with the olive branch having been carried in a procession in a Catholic church in Genoa before being brought back to Brabant and replanted? It is tempting to read this passage as the possibility of a naturalization of political and religious difference. Just as parents can have children with different hair color, Christianity can give birth to both Protestants and Catholics. Dorléan was, of course, keenly aware that Henry IV's mother, Jeanne d'Albret, and his father, Antoine de Navarre, had both been Protestant, although his father abjured in the end. Henry IV, who, as it is well known, fluctuated back and forth between Protestantism and Catholicism before making his final saut périlleux in 1593, we could view this in light of the hybridity of the olive tree, whose white flowers turn black. If in parts of his text, which I do not have the time to evoke here, Dorléan seems almost unapologetic when it comes to his past as an ultra-Catholic leaguer, here in this interpretation of the graft of the olive trees story, it is as if he were suggesting that religious difference did not matter as much as it once had. And as if botany might in fact give, if not an argument for religious tolerance, because Dorléan remains a fervent Catholic through and through, at least an explanation of variation and hybridity as universal phenomena. The naturalist rationale he proposes, the apple trees can produce both white and red fruits, accentuates the idea that difference is ultimately not what counts. Apples are still apples, whether or not they are white or red. We could also understand this explanation as a way of minimizing his own experience of the wars of religion and exile. The diversity of nature in this passage seems to be a way of thinking through the trauma of war and the role he played in the Ultra-Catholic League before Henry IV had squashed their efforts in 1594, banishing him and other leaders from France. In fact, as a repentant leaguer, Dorléan might himself be viewed as a kind of hybrid figure. Once opposed to the king, he now extols his virtues in a long eulogy. This is actually the second one. By taking up a naturalist discourse on the diversity of the flowers and adopting botanical metaphors as a source for his text, he seems to be reconciling himself, we might say, with his political and religious past. Of course, there's also ambivalence in hybridity. It is not a straightforward absorption of difference into sameness, nor are the two elements kept intact and distinct from each other. Again, Dorléan is not for limitless toleration, but he seems nonetheless to be able to understand the necessary hybridization of France through the peaceful coexistence of Protestants and Catholics, affirmed by Henry IV in the Edict of Nantes. Of course, it goes without saying that the most obvious hybridity at work here, as a paradigm that is applied to a variety of historical and political circumstances, and that governs the text through and through, is the human-plant hybrid. Plants and humans, as we have already seen, do not fundamentally differ in their anatomies. They share a circulatory system that arborescences in both cases from the center to the extremities. More importantly, they behave in similar ways, capable as they are of experiencing emotions. Here, the plant becomes a model through which the connection of everything with everything is made obvious. Hybridity is being represented at the work of nature itself, as the work of nature itself. Just as plants resemble men and men resemble plants, Catholics resemble Protestants and Protestants Catholics. They are like the branches connected to a single trunk. As we can see, politics is undeniably naturalized in Dorléan's work. Using the imagery of plants and trees to talk about politics and theology is in no way new. Plants have been used to give political lessons and discuss morals for a long time. Nature is, as it were, the mother of politics. However, I think there is something different at work in Dorléan's text. In it, we encounter a redefinition of the boundaries of the political, a reconfiguration of what is included within its sphere. And because of this, a new narrative emerges, one that encompasses a new paradigm of universal arborescence. The king is both Catholic and Protestant, human and plant, terrestrial and divine. He is the trunk of the tree that has brought unity to the branches of France. He is the one who has officiated the return of accord and harmony after the religious and civil troubles of the wars of religion, producing the flowers and fruits of reconciliation and peace. He is the mediator between the terrestrial world and the divine one. The most striking innovation of d'Orléans' text is precisely this arborescence. As I mentioned at the beginning of this talk, our author is not using traditional metaphors to depict the king in politics, such as that of the boat, the navire, or that of the body politic. The king is not depicted as merely having two bodies, to borrow categories defined by Ernst Kantorowicz. That is to say, as having both a body natural, which is human, carnal, subjected to passions, the passage of time, disease, death, and a body immortal, which is representative of the body politic, or the corps mystique. But Henry IV is now also being represented as a corporate entity that is allied with nature. He is a plante humaine. The body politic metaphor has been transformed and made botanical. So what are the ramifications, I'm thinking of the word, the etymology of this word, of this metaphor that d'Orléans has been developing here? It is clear that the monarch's dominion has been extended. It has branched out. He is, we might say, arborescing. Moreover, the royal we, otherwise known as the majestic plural, pluralis majestatis, has also changed. It is as if nature herself were speaking through him. In d'Orléans' strange eulogy, the king's body is represented as something that extends out in unexpected directions, incorporating and absorbing the world in an encyclopedic way, bringing together histories, politics, and natures. Most importantly, the use of this metaphor serves to represent a new model of absolutism. Henry IV is the trunk of the olive tree that holds together a fragilized France, made up of many divided branches: Protestants, Catholics, Negroes, politique, royalist. He serves as the connecting force that allows these differing shoots to coexist. He's the tree that orders all other communities. But the model of absolutism proposed here is not the homogeneous one that will later emerge in Louis XIV's France, that of La France toute catholique. Unlike the Sun King's leveling light that crushes or scorches those whose religious beliefs differ from his own, this early absolutism tells a story of hybridity and connectedness into an arborescent power whose branches divide, fork, extend, but are held by the steady trunk of the state. The metaphor of botany is d'Orléans' way of understanding the new political configuration orchestrated by the king he opposed for many years and against whom he authored incendiary pamphlets. Through it, he constructs a new political narrative that holds together past and present, enemies and friends, old and new, dead kings and kings to come. Thank you.